My father decided to disinherit me for being born a woman. I left home carrying only a notebook, and what I had written in it helped me overcome the situation and made him ask for my forgiveness. You will never work at Miller Holdings, Sophia. This place is no place for women. She froze. Her father's words cut through her like a razor, without warning, without any hesitation. Michael didn't even lift his eyes from his newspaper as he spoke. He said it like it was an irrefutable natural law, something unquestionable, something final. It was there, at the age of 18, that Sophia understood that despite the powerful surname she carried, she was on the outside looking in. To the world, she was merely the daughter of the Spanish mogul Michael Miller, the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. But within the walls of her own home, she was a decorative figure. She grew up surrounded by luxury, shaped to shine at social events, trained to smile beside the men who ran the world. While her brothers and cousins accompanied their father on business trips, she learned to serve tea and pose for photos. Michael was never violent. He never needed to raise his voice. He wielded his authority with the same coldness with which he made corporate decisions. He kept up the image of a modern, progressive man in front of the cameras, but at home, he ruled everything with old-world rules. In interviews, he spoke of innovation, inclusion, and the future. He never mentioned Sophia. Her absence was carefully orchestrated. At corporate events, she was never invited. In the company's gala photos, she was never beside her father. When asked about succession, Michael spoke of strong leadership, new generations, and he would divert the conversation. He never uttered his own daughter's name. Sophia soon realized that her presence was unwanted in that world, but she didn't give up. She began studying business in secret, like someone committing a crime. She read financial reports in the bathroom, with the door locked. She watched Harvard videos in secret. She wrote detailed notes in a black notebook, hidden behind books in the library. While her father dined with bankers, she reviewed financial statements. While he gave speeches about sustainable growth on television, she analyzed market data and sketched strategies to modernize the company. She tried talking to him several times. She brought well-structured ideas, charts, projections. But Michael listened as if she were talking about fashion. "This is interesting, dear, but you're too sensitive for this kind of environment." Or, "You should focus on something more feminine. How about philanthropy? Women have a natural gift for that." With every sentence like this, Sophia grew quieter. Not out of resignation, out of exhaustion. She began to store all the proposals he ignored in her notebook. She started to write down everything she felt: frustration, anger, helplessness, and above all, the feeling of being worthless. It was in this state of contained silence that a few months later, Sophia heard the news that would change everything. It wasn't in a private conversation, nor in a respectful gesture from father to daughter. She heard it from others, at a corporate dinner where she shouldn't have been, but had managed to infiltrate by claiming she wanted to learn more about the backstage of Miller Holdings. Michael had announced his succession plan, but the name he pronounced loud and clear was not that of any family member. He would hand over control of the company to Alexander Taylor, his longtime partner and a man he trusted completely. A discreet, methodical executive with no heirs. Sophia felt her body go cold. She thought she must have misheard. She waited for some mention, some explanation, but her name wasn't even spoken. She returned home in silence. The next morning, she walked into her father's office with firm steps, trying to contain her fury. Michael was standing by the fireplace, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "You're going to leave everything to Alexander? And what about me?" He turned slowly, as though he'd been expecting this. "You'll have a comfortable life, Sophia. You don't need this." It took her a few seconds to understand what that meant. "Am I disinherited?" she asked, her voice low, almost hoarse. Michael sighed, stepping away from the fireplace. Disinherited is a strong word. You will always have everything you need. Your trust fund remains intact, but Miller Holdings is not your path. You don't need to involve yourself in this. His calm tone was worse than a shout. Sophia felt betrayed, discarded, like someone quietly being removed from a guest list. He didn't argue. He communicated decisions as if they had been made years ago. She tried to contest it legally. She sought out lawyers, reviewed clauses, contracts, wills, but everything was already airtight. The succession process had been orchestrated months in advance, with adjustments made discreetly, leaving no loopholes. Isolated and without answers, she decided to speak with Rebecca, her stepmother. She hoped for some empathy, or at least some humanity. But what she found was veiled contempt. "Sophia, you're a smart woman, but sometimes it feels like you live in a world that doesn't exist. Your father only wants what's best for you." She said this while delicately stirring her tea, not even bothering to look up, as if speaking to a stubborn child. Michael, for his part, avoided any further discussions. He limited himself to repeating the same phrase, "I've made my decision." The following night, Sophia packed a small suitcase. She took only a few clothes, documents, and the black notebook where she had written everything over the years. She left the mansion in Dallas without telling anyone. She took a taxi to Boston, where Lily, her childhood friend, lived. The only person who still saw her as someone capable of building something of her own. Lily welcomed her with a tight hug, without asking any questions, offering the guest room as if offering shelter from a war. In the following days, Sophia faced a world that until then had only been theoretical. She took crowded buses, spent hours in bank lines, bumped into bureaucracies that had once seemed invisible. For the first time, she lived like an ordinary person. And it was there, in that chaos without privilege, that she found a new purpose. She decided she would no longer try to enter a door that would never open. She would build her own from scratch. She spent days researching impact startups, programs for social entrepreneurs in USA. That's when she found a government grant aimed at projects that included vulnerable youth. Inspired, she grabbed her notebook and began drafting her idea. A startup that would connect private companies with underprivileged communities through technology. A startup that would create bridges where the system only built walls. If you're watching up to here, I'm sure you're enjoying it, so I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. The following week, she filled out the grant application with trembling hands, sitting at the kitchen table in Lily's house. Project name, Rise Viva, a digital platform that would connect companies with underserved communities, promoting inclusion, training, and social impact through technology. She wrote the name without knowing exactly why she had chosen it, but it felt right. Rise, root, for everything that had been left behind. Viva, alive, for everything that could still be born. A few days later, she received the response. Her project had been selected to participate in an acceleration program in Boston, with 6 months of free mentorship. She reread the email several times, as if the words could vanish from the screen. For the first time, someone saw value in what she had created, alone, from scratch. At the first meeting of the program, she met Benjamin, one of the mentors. He was young but experienced, with a restless energy and a generous ear. He was an expert in social innovation, and when he heard Sophia's impromptu pitch, he set down his tablet and leaned forward. "You know you've got something big on your hands, right? You just need to structure it." She wasn't used to being taken seriously. She smiled, unsure of how to respond, but he insisted, "Let me help you, this has real potential." From that day on, their partnership grew like a flame fed by fresh air. They exchanged ideas, sketched possibilities, corrected mistakes. And amidst spreadsheets and models, there were also heart-to-heart moments. Benjamin was the first person to listen, without judgment, to everything Sophia had carried since her teenage years. About her father, the imposed silence, the exclusion, and perhaps that's why their connection was so strong. Their meetings were technical, but they always ended with deep conversations. One day, Benjamin took her to a meeting with a collective of women entrepreneurs in the region. It was a diverse group, full of powerful stories and paths of resistance. Sophia arrived shy, afraid of not being accepted, but within a few minutes, she felt something new: belonging. There, no one doubted her ability. Every word she spoke was heard with attention. There was no condescending gaze, as she had known so well. There was listening support, real exchange. Between coffees and workshops, she began to learn terms that had once seemed distant: pitch, MVP, fundraising. She discovered that she could translate her ideas into numbers, formats, and strategies for impact, but reality didn't wait for dreams. To survive, Sophia began taking on freelance work, editing texts, translating, even doing administrative support for local small businesses. She worked during the day and advanced on the project at night, feeding Raíz Viva with every penny she saved and every hour of sleep she sacrificed. In a desperate impulse, she tried reaching out to old colleagues from Dallas's elite. She sent messages, emails, even formal invitations to introduce them to the project. Most didn't respond. Others gave cold, evasive answers. She realized that to them, she was no longer part of that world, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It only confirmed what she had already suspected. She didn't want anything to do with it anymore. With Benjamin's help, the women from the collective, and a few volunteers who joined the project, Sophia managed to put together the first functional version of the platform. It was still simple, but it was alive. Within a few weeks, the first NGOs and companies started registering. The team was tiny, the system failed, but the essence worked. One day, alone in her room, she saw the notification of the first match between a medium-sized company and a community project in Dallas. She cried silently. It wasn't sadness, it was something deeper. For the first time, she had built something with purpose, something that no one could take away. The following week, the team was still improvising solutions when a link began circulating in the collective groups. An article in Boston's biggest newspaper had a headline in bold letters: "Ex-heir to Miller creates social startup connecting companies and communities." The photo was an image of Sophia taken at an event with NGOs, smiling in front of a colorful panel. The article told the story of the Raíz Viva platform, highlighting its rapid growth and positive impact. In the penultimate paragraph, the name Miller appeared in bold. Sophia felt her stomach turn. She knew that sooner or later the past would come knocking. But seeing her name linked to the family in a public headline was like reliving everything she was trying to bury. The response didn't take long. On the same day, a spokesperson for Miller Holdings released a brief statement to the press. The company and its board have no connection with the initiative mentioned. This is a personal project of Miss Sophia Miller. And Michael? Not a word, no gesture, absolute silence. Behind the scenes, however, the wheels were already turning. Lauren Anderson, Michael's image consultant for over 10 years, took control of the narrative. Discreet but ruthless, Lauren made calls, planted doubts, contacted social columnists. Within a week, sordid rumors began to spread in business circles that Sophia had lost her mind, that she had been emotionally unstable since adolescence, that her father had tried to help her, but she had chosen to live among the poor. At a cocktail party in Charlotte, a journalist approached Sophia directly and aggressively. "Don't you feel ashamed to expose your family like this?" She froze for a moment but answered firmly, "I would feel ashamed if I had accepted in silence." The interview went viral. The social media erupted. While many women defended her, A swarm of sexist comments started growing under posts on the Raiz Viva pages. Rich little girl trying to play the saint. Feminist just trying to get attention. She should be married, not wasting money. Sophia considered remaining silent, but Benjamin was quicker. He recorded a short video in the Raiz Viva office, looking directly into the camera. Sophia Miller is my co-founder, and she is one of the most committed, intelligent, and courageous people I've ever met. If the discomfort comes from her being a woman, they better get used to it, because she's not stopping. The video also went viral, but with a different effect. The team, which was already united, began to act with a silent loyalty. Everyone felt like they were part of something bigger. Sophia, for her part, decided to respond the only way she knew, with work. The following week, she secured her first official partnership with the government of Jalisco, which began using the platform to connect public initiatives with local social projects. She also started receiving invitations to give lectures at universities. Young people filled the rooms to hear her speak about social impact, grassroots entrepreneurship, and resistance. And little by little, the name Raiz Viva ceased to be just a promising project. It became a symbol. It bothered people, especially the old elite of Dallas, who couldn't accept seeing a woman they had discarded become a reference outside their gilded halls. In the silent mansion of Dallas, Michael Miller watched everything from afar, though not as far as he would have liked to pretend. At the end of a suffocating night, in the office where he kept his impeccably organized personal library, he clicked on a video of an interview that had already gathered thousands of views on YouTube. Sophia, sitting in front of the cameras, spoke with conviction about the power of social impact, the value of inclusion, and with a firmness he recognized all too well, about what it meant to be ignored by the ones you love the most. Michael didn't react. He watched it all without blinking. When the video ended, he quickly closed the tab as if he had made a mistake. He walked over to the shelf, grabbed a random book, and pretended to be interested. But the way his fingers gripped the spine revealed the restlessness he was trying to hide, even from himself. The next morning, Lauren Anderson entered his office with calculated steps, her heels tapping rhythmically on the marble floor. "We need to reposition your image, Michael. The fallout from Sophia's interview was bigger than expected. She's being seen as a reference in social impact." He didn't even look up. "What do you suggest?" "A strong philanthropic move from Miller Holdings. Something symbolic that reinforces your commitment to social causes." Michael nodded. "As long as my name is at the center of everything." Lauren hesitated for a second. "Of course." Weeks later, Sophia received an unexpected invitation to speak at the National Conference on Innovation and Social Responsibility in Dallas. It was a high-profile event with national media coverage and the presence of influential leaders. She accepted without knowing that, among the speakers, Michael Miller had also been invited, at the last minute, to announce a new era of social commitment from Miller Holdings. Lauren had made her move. The reunion took place behind the scenes of the main auditorium. Sophia was reviewing her notes when she heard firm footsteps approaching. She turned slowly. He was there, in front of her, wearing the same dark suit as always, his expression unreadable. "Sophia." "Michael." No hugs, no smiles, just a dry nod of acknowledgement. He looked at her with the same gaze he used in executive meetings, evaluative, distant, almost clinical. On stage, Michael was the first to speak. He gave a 20-minute speech about tradition, legacy, and the importance of business leadership in fighting inequality. He was applauded, but not with enthusiasm. The audience recognized the power but didn't feel the truth. Then it was her turn. Sophia took a deep breath. The auditorium was packed. She looked out at the audience and began. My name is Sophia Miller, and for a long time, that was all I was allowed to be. She spoke about absence, closed doors, about a system that silences women from the cradle. She shared how she had used the pain as fuel, and how she had decided to build something from scratch when she realized she wasn't welcome, even in the house she was born into. I didn't come here to talk about numbers. I came to talk about purpose. Because companies can grow, but when they grow at the cost of the silence of their own daughters, something is deeply wrong. The audience remained silent for a second that felt like eternity. And then the applause came, standing ovation, long, moved. Michael was no longer there. He had left quietly minutes before the end. He couldn't bear to hear it all. In the car, Lauren silently stared at her phone. The social media was filled with videos of Sophia's speech. The hashtag #DeRiseViva was trending. She sighed, unable to hide her discomfort. Michael, this is no longer working. He kept his eyes fixed on the window, but the phrase hung in the air like a sentence. In the days that followed the conference, Sophia received invitations from all over USA. But it was the email from the Secretary of Social Development in New York that made her stop. They wanted her to lead a pilot project inspired by the RiseViva model, now focused on integrating homeless youth into the formal job market through training connected to partner companies. The invitation was clear. They wanted her to take the lead. She accepted with gratitude, but also with the weight of someone who knew the size of the responsibility. She spent weeks in meetings, evaluating scenarios, redesigning strategies. And when the first phase of the project was officially launched, a special report by Televisa highlighted RiseViva as an example of technology with real social impact. Images of her and Benjamin on the field, data from the first results, testimonials from participants, all aired. When she returned to Boston, she was welcomed like a local hero. The women from the collective organized a small surprise reception with makeshift banners and a cake with the name RiseViva written in pink icing. The volunteers cheered, took photos, and repeated how inspired they felt. She smiled, hugged them one by one, but inside there was a tiredness she couldn't ignore. Benjamin noticed. In the following days, she arrived late to meetings, made small mistakes, forgot tasks. Silently, he started watching her until one afternoon when she stayed alone in the room longer than usual. He entered without knocking. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he said, his tone calm, as if he didn't want to invade, but was refusing to leave. She didn't respond immediately. She sat with her hands in her lap, staring at the black notebook, the same one she had carried since the days in the mansion in Dallas. "I know," she finally replied, "but it feels like if I stop now, everything will fall apart. And what if it's the opposite? What if stopping is what prevents everything from falling apart?" 2 days later, with reluctance and a backpack on her back, Sophia got into the car next to Benjamin. The destination, Valle de Bravo, a simple cabin away from the city surrounded by pine trees and silence. For the first time in a long time, she turned off her phone. On the second day, while the sun set behind the mountains and the smell of wood filled the porch, she spoke. "Sometimes I feel like a fraud. Everyone talks about strength, but I still suffer because I wasn't accepted by him." Benjamin didn't try to console her. He didn't say it would pass, nor that she needed to be strong. He just stayed beside her, listening as he always did. No judgment, no rush, just presence. On the way back to Boston, something inside her had changed. It was subtle, but it was real. When she got home, she opened the laptop and wrote, without planning, "Deserdadas, no derrotadas, disinherited, not defeated." It was the name of RiseViva's new campaign, a space for women who, like her, had been cast aside by their families, denied their abilities, silenced in their will. Within hours, the hashtag began gaining traction. The first stories came timidly, Then, in droves, stories of abandonment, resistance, and reclaiming strength. Women of all ages shared their journeys, tagging the campaign, sending videos, sharing photos. Sophia read it all in silence with a tight chest, until she saw a young woman, 18 years old, saying, "I thought it was just me, but now I know we are many." She closed the laptop, covered her face with her hands, and cried. It was no longer out of sadness. It was the certainty at last that she wasn't alone. A different kind of tension filled the cold, luxurious halls of Miller Holdings. Board meetings had become shorter and more tense. Michael, though maintaining his appearance of control, no longer convinced like he used to. The shareholders, once aligned with his traditional strategies, began to question the company's conservatism. While the Mexican business world was speeding up its opening to innovation, sustainability, and social impact, Miller Holdings seemed stuck in time, with rigid speeches and outdated practices. "We need to keep up with the market, Michael," one of the directors said, his tone bordering on confrontation. "Your stance is making us lose relevance." Michael responded with evasions, insisting on preserving the company's solid values, but everyone knew he was losing ground. And Lauren Anderson didn't wait for the house to fall apart. On a Monday morning, she handed in her resignation letter without even requesting a private conversation. She said she was moving on to a new cycle, partnering with a fund focused on innovation, specifically companies led by women and tech-based social projects. Michael didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded coldly, his gaze empty. Days later, the cover of Forbes USA featured Sophia's face with the headline, "The 10 Minds of the Future, Leaders Redesigning USA." The article spoke about Raíz Viva, the national reach of the project, and the philosophy Sophia and Benjamin had implemented to create real impact with accessible technology. Michael read it all. Alone, in the office where he used to decide the future of executives, now locked away, following the rise of a daughter he pretended not to see. But the truth was asserting itself. That same week, an ex-employee from Miller Holdings, Anthony King, approached Sophia's team. He was over 50, with extensive management experience, but had been let go during one of the company's cold restructurings. It was Benjamin who mentioned his name. "He's willing to learn, Sophia, and he said he wants to be part of this." She took a deep breath before agreeing to the meeting. Anthony arrived punctually, wearing a press shirt but with a look filled with uncertainty. He sat across from her and said, "I'm not here for the salary. I'm here because I'm tired of being part of structures that ignore real people. I want to start over." Sophia listened to everything. She didn't interrupt, and when she spoke, she was clear. "Here, we work differently. Respect is the foundation, empathy is not a favor, and impact is what guides every decision. If you're ready for that, welcome." He stayed, and he wasn't the only one. Raíz Viva's team grew quickly, absorbing a variety of talents: young graduates, women heads of families, self-taught programmers from indigenous communities, professionals seeking a fresh start. There was no pattern, there was purpose. With this new momentum, Benjamin and Sophia expanded operations to historically forgotten regions, Ohio and Virginia. Partnerships with local NGOs flourished, and the startup's technology began to be used to map real needs and connect micro-projects with companies willing to invest in concrete changes. Raíz Viva became a reference. It was mentioned at international events, studied by universities, replicated in entire municipalities. And Michael? He watched it all, with the TV turned on at a low volume and his phone displaying alerts about new mentions of his daughter's name. He realized he was being left behind, not just by his daughter, but by a world that no longer tolerated the old discourse from the top of the pyramid. While he lost himself in silences and regrets that he would never verbalize, Raíz Viva took another leap. The invitation came by email, with the blue seal of the United Nations at the top of the message. The startup had been selected to represent USA in a global forum on innovation and social impact in Paris. Benjamin entered the office with his phone in hand, his eyes shining. "Sophia, it's official. The UN wants you on the main panel." She stood still, a whirlwind inside. On the outside, only a contained smile. Benjamin understood what this meant, but didn't press her. That night, sitting at the kitchen table, she called Lily. Her friend answered calmly, the voice that had known her since before everything started. "They invited me to speak at the UN," Sophia said, almost as if apologizing. "And what's the doubt?" Lily replied. "And if I'm not ready, what if it's too much?" "Sophia, you came from a mansion where you were invisible. You built something from scratch. You faced your own father. You were humiliated publicly and turned pain into movement. You've already faced what many wouldn't survive. You're not just ready, you already are." Sophia cried silently for a few seconds, and then she decided, "I'll go, but I want to bring someone with me." The following week, the UN team received an extra request. Sophia Miller wanted to bring a young woman who had benefited from the Raíz Viva platform to participate in the event. The name submitted was Natalie Rios, a 19-year-old from a community in Virginia, recently graduated from a technical training course provided by the platform. The trip was simple, but filled with meaning. Sophia and Natalie boarded together. Neither of them had been to Paris before. Both carried in their hearts the weight of journeys marked by denial and the strength of those who decided not to accept the fate that had been imposed on them. The event took place in a prestigious room at the United Nations headquarters, with representatives from more than 30 countries. When Sophia's name was announced, she walked to the podium, her heart racing. Natalie watched from the first row, visibly moved. Sophia took a deep breath. She looked ahead, and she began. "For a long time, I believed my only role was to inherit something, that my last name was all I had. But today, I understand that being an heir never defined me. Being useful, yes." She spoke about purpose, about rebuilding, the importance of using technology to bridge gaps, of listening to those who have never been heard. When she finished, the audience stood up. The applause echoed through the hall with a force that surprised her. It wasn't politics, it was recognition. The next day, media outlets from Germany to Brazil highlighted her speech. Specialized portals in social impact listed Raíz Viva as one of the most promising startups in Latin America. International support began pouring in, NGOs, ethical investment funds, academic networks. When she landed back in USA, Sophia was met with invitations for interviews, collaborations, and awards. People wanted her image, her story, her presence. But while her phone vibrated incessantly, all she wanted was to return to the office in Boston, sit down with the team, and see firsthand what truly mattered: the work happening. She didn't want luxury. She didn't want fame. She wanted continuity, because it was there, in every connection made between a company and a community, that she found what she had always sought: meaning. Many kilometers away, in an increasingly silent mansion in Dallas, Michael Miller walked the corridors like a stranger in his own home. The absence of Lauren, the distancing of his usual allies, and the emptiness of decisions that lacked real impact had transformed the empire he had built into a cold, purposeless structure. On a grey afternoon, perhaps moved by boredom or loneliness, he went up to the attic, a place he hadn't visited in years. He found dusty boxes, old folders, and objects hastily stored away. At the back of a shelf, he spotted the old photo albums. He sat on the floor, opened the first one, and there she was. Sophia, at 5 years old, dressed as a ballerina, smiling freely at the camera. In another, her eyes squinted from laughter, covered in paint during an art workshop. There was a sequence where he himself held her on his shoulders in the garden of the summer house. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. He felt a lump in his throat that wasn't just nostalgia, it was guilt. Because there she was, the little girl he had ignored for years. The little girl who didn't fit into his plans. The daughter he treated like an accessory when she was already a force. Later, in the library, while flipping through the newspaper of the day, her name jumped out at him. Raíz Viva brings digital inclusion project to southern USA. The headline was on the front page of El Universal with a photo and a highlight. He read every line. When he finished, he leaned back in the armchair and let out a long sigh. It was a feeling that mixed shame and pride, like her success was both a slap and a hug. In the following days, without telling anyone, he decided to attend one of Sophia's lectures. He knew she would be speaking at a university event in Dallas. He dressed in dark jeans, a plain shirt, a cap and sunglasses. A simple disguise, but enough to blend in with the young crowd filling the auditorium. He sat in the back rows and waited. When she walked onto the stage, a wave of applause spread through the room. She didn't just speak, she captivated. She told stories, listened to questions, quoted data, but always with empathy. She spoke about projects, but also about people. And in every sentence, there was something Michael had never taught her, but now admired deeply. Sensitivity. In the middle of her presentation, Sophia stopped for a second. Her gaze swept the audience as if searching for something or someone. She felt a strange presence, not a threat, but a subtle discomfort, as if something invisible were unsettling her balance. She quickly regained focus, but the feeling lingered for hours. Michael left before the audience dispersed. He didn't want to risk being seen. When he got home, he locked himself in the office and opened a drawer where he kept personal papers. He took a sheet of paper, a pen, and began to write. Sophia. He stopped, got up, walked in circles, and sat back down. He tried again. I don't know where to begin, and maybe you won't even want to hear it, but... He tore the sheet up, started another one, repeated the gesture. Soon, the trash can was full of interrupted attempts. It was the first time he had seriously considered apologizing, but he didn't know how, not with cold words, not with justifications, and for a man who had spent his life always having something to say, that was the hardest thing of all. It was the first time he had seriously considered apologizing, but he didn't know how. Not with cold words, not with justifications. And for a man who had spent his life always having something to say, that was the hardest thing of all. Weeks later, Sophia received a discreet but elegant invitation, a private event on philanthropy, focused on new models of social impact in USA. The organization listed startup leaders, representatives of international foundations, and traditional businessmen who were slowly trying to reposition themselves as benefactors. She almost refused, exhausted from political interactions disguised as altruism, but decided to go. Being there meant marking her presence in spaces that for decades had ignored voices like hers. Upon arrival, a security guard asked for her name and checked the list carefully. Behind her, a subtle movement made her body tense. The receptionist smiled politely. Miss Sophia Miller and Mr. Michael Miller, both confirmed. She didn't say anything. She simply nodded with a neutral smile and entered. Inside, her stomach was churning. The room was refined, with dim lighting and instrumental music filling the spaces between polite conversations. When she spotted him across the room, a chill ran down her spine. Michael was standing talking with an American investor. He wore the same immaculate suit, but something in his posture had changed. He was more withdrawn, less arrogant. Their eyes met. The tension was inevitable, but Sophia kept her composure. She greeted people, answered questions, and handed out cards. She feigned normality. On the outside, she was the professional everyone expected. Inside, there was a silent storm. At the end of a round-table discussion, while she was drinking a glass of water near the garden area, Michael approached slowly. 5 minutes, that's all I ask. She looked at her watch, then at him. She took a deep breath. 5. They moved to a more secluded corner where only the distant hum of the room could be heard. Michael tried to start with something light, but his voice faltered. He ran a hand through his hair, visibly nervous. I know I wasn't the father you needed. I thought I was protecting you. That taking you out of that world was sparing you. Sophia listened in silence, her eyes locked on him. Still. I thought the business world was too cruel for you, that you wouldn't make it, but the one who didn't make it was me. She finally spoke. You taught me how not to be. Well, the words were said firmly, without anger, but with all the truth she had carried for years. Michael lowered his eyes. I didn't want you to get hurt. You hurt me just the same. But strangely, I'm grateful. Your absence is what forced me to truly be born. He didn't respond. He didn't try to defend himself. He simply nodded, his eyes wet. You became everything I never had the courage to be, he said finally. After that, there were no hugs, no promises, just a respectful silence between two versions of the same story, now exposed to the light. Sophia left that encounter feeling lighter, but on alert. She knew that any gesture coming from Michael carried weight, intentions, and scars. So, when she received the email 3 days later, her heart didn't race, it just braced itself. It was a formal investment proposal. Michael wanted to invest in Heiress. The amount was high, the proposal was straightforward, but the sender in itself made it more complicated than any contract. Benjamin was the first to read it, his eyebrows raised. He wants to be involved with the company? Now? Sophia didn't react immediately. She grabbed her phone, looked at the email again, and replied with a simple, "Let's talk." She knew she couldn't refuse out of impulse, nor accept without conditions. At the meeting, which took place in a discreet cafe in Boston, she was clear. If you want to be part of this, you will have to follow our rules. There is no space for control here, only for contribution. I need 3 things: total transparency, absolute respect, and 0 decision-making power. Michael stared at her for a moment, surprised, but he nodded. I agree with everything. I just want to help. Truly. Later, Benjamin expressed what she already knew. I don't trust him. Not yet. Neither do I completely, Sophia replied. But I know he's trying, and our mission remains intact. As long as that happens, I can handle it. Michael's entry into Heiress was quiet, with no public announcement, no pompous titles. He joined only as a supporting investor. But his physical presence in meetings, in the team spaces, was inevitable and strange. At first, the atmosphere grew tense whenever he appeared. Some of the older staff avoided direct contact. Others pretended to be casual, but observed everything with curiosity. Sophia noticed the exchanged glances, the whispered conversations in the hallway. To integrate, Michael began attending the workshops promoted by the startup. They were simple meetings with representatives from communities, young people who had benefited from the platform, social entrepreneurs. There, he wasn't an executive, he was just another listener. On the first day, he left in silence, visibly uncomfortable. On the second, he asked questions. On the third, he stayed after the session, talking to a young woman from Ohio about how she learned to program on an old phone with videos downloaded via free Wi-Fi in a public square. The change was slow, almost imperceptible, but real. Sophia watched from afar without interfering. Sometimes they exchanged glances during internal events. Other times he approached, commented on something, praised a solution, suggested an idea, all with the caution of someone who knew he was still regaining ground. Benjamin remained distrustful, but over time he acknowledged that something was different, and so did the team. It didn't take long for Michael's rigid, unreachable figure to begin giving way to the man who was now listening more than speaking. The conversations between father and daughter started to be brief, as if treading carefully on delicate ground. Comments about the day, impact analysis, exchanges about organizational culture. Then came the memories, shared cautiously in fragmented phrases, but sincere. One late afternoon, while they were finalizing a report together in the team room, Sophia called him to review the data from the latest operation in Virginia. He stood up, walked to the table, and she said, without overthinking, "Dad, help me with this here?" The silence was immediate. He stopped halfway. She did too. They didn't look at each other, nor comment. They simply continued. But that "Dad" said naturally meant more than any formal apology. It was a small gesture, but for both of them, it symbolized a journey, a silent bridge between what was and what could be. Shortly after, Sophia received the most unexpected invitation since the beginning of her public journey. The National Congress on Social Innovation in Monterey wanted her to be the keynote speaker at that year's edition. The event would bring together leaders, academics, activists, and government representatives from all over the country. Her name would appear at the top of a schedule that, until recently, wouldn't have considered anyone with her profile. Benjamin was the first to celebrate. "This is the peak, Sophia. You have to be there." "I know," she replied, staring at the invitation on her screen. "But I need to be whole." They began preparing the speech together, amid sleepless nights and cold coffees. Benjamin reviewed the words with a technical eye, but allowed her to insert her truth without filters. "If you're going to speak, speak everything," he said. "People need to hear not only what you've built, but what you've had to overcome." On the day of the event, the auditorium was packed. More than 1,000 people seated, others watching through live transmission. Sophia took the stage with a calmness that only comes after going through immense pain. She took a deep breath, looked ahead, and began. "For years they told me who I should be. They called me heir, rebel, ungrateful, but no one ever asked me what I wanted." She shared her story without hesitation. She spoke about exclusion within her own home, about violence disguised as protection, about the elegant and cruel machismo that shapes entire dynasties. She pointed out the structural elitism that prevents young people from the periphery from dreaming. She criticized the philanthropy model that feeds egos but doesn't transform realities. "It wasn't power that shaped me. It was the absence of it. It wasn't support that made me strong. It was the lack of it." She named Raiz Viva's youth. She told real stories. She made it clear that she wasn't there as an exception, but as the spearhead of a generation that refuses to repeat the same mistakes. The reaction was instantaneous. The auditorium applauded her, standing, for long minutes. Some stood up with tears in their eyes, others filmed, others simply smiled silently. Michael was sitting in the penultimate row. He didn't applaud immediately. He needed a few seconds to process. Then he stood up as well, but slowly. He was moved. His eyes, filled with emotion, didn't escape the camera of a photographer at the back of the room. At the end of the speech, Sophia left the stage, ignoring the line of businessmen waiting to congratulate her. She walked across the hall to meet a group of young people who had participated in a newly launched project in Virginia. They were beneficiaries of the platform. She hugged them tightly, one by one, took photos with them. She made sure to show, through her actions, who she truly valued. The next morning, the media featured headlines: From disinherited to national leader, Sophia Miller moves Congress and redefines family legacy. The repercussions were intense, and for the first time, Michael decided not to hide. He accepted an invitation for a live interview on a national radio station. "I've made grave mistakes," he said, speaking into the microphone. "I confused authority with silence, power with absence. My daughter owes me nothing, but I owe her the recognition for everything she has built." It was a brief statement, but enough to make an impact, to show that at last he had stopped running away. Back in the intense routine of Raíz Viva, Sophia received an unexpected invitation. It was simple, delivered by hand by a motorcycle courier with the Miller Holdings seal on the envelope. The sender, Michael. The location, the family mansion in Dallas. The reason, a special event in your honor. She hesitated for a few days before responding. Not out of distrust, that no longer guided her steps, but because she knew that returning to that place would bring painful memories. But she accepted, not for him, for herself, for everything she had faced to no longer be defined by that address. When she arrived, she was surprised. The facade remained the same, but the interior of the house had changed. Where there were once cold paintings and shelves filled with corporate trophies, there were now colorful banners, photographs of communities served by Raíz Viva, printed testimonials, and screens displaying videos of projects in Ohio, Virginia, and Jalisco. The mansion seemed to have, at last, made space for real stories. There were representatives from various parts of the country, young people who had benefited from the project, community leaders and partners. Benjamin was there, quieter than usual, standing by the team, his eyes misty since the moment Sophia entered. In the center of the room, a small stage had been set up. Michael climbed it slowly, without a microphone but with a sheet of paper in his hands. He waited for silence before beginning. "I spent my life being proud of what I built, but today I realized that my greatest achievement was never in columns of profits, but in the courage of my daughter." He paused. His gaze wavered, but he continued. "My daughter taught me everything I refused to see. She showed me that leadership is not control. That impact doesn't come from above, but from the side. And that legacy is not what you leave in buildings, but what you plant in people." Polite applause filled the room. Sophia took the stage shortly after, her eyes on him for a brief second. She grabbed the microphone but didn't speak hastily. "I appreciate this honor, but I need to say something. This is not about me. It never was. I'm just one among many. Women, young people, mothers, leaders from the periphery, people the system tried to silence. We are many, and we keep going." The atmosphere changed. Formality gave way to raw emotion. A young woman from Virginia took the microphone and shared how, before Raíz Viva, dreaming of a college degree seemed absurd. A young man from Ohio spoke about how he opened his first business through a connection made on the platform. Each testimonial broke protocol and stitched something new into that night. Benjamin, at the back of the room, wiped his eyes to hold back the tears. He never needed to say anything to understand everything. Later, after the hugs, photos, and sincere smiles, Sophia went out to the garden. Michael followed her silently, as if still asking for permission to be close. They sat together in silence, in front of the same fountain where she used to play as a child. "You know," he started, "sometimes I still don't know how to look at you without thinking about the time I lost." Sophia didn't answer immediately. She looked at the sky, painted in orange and gray, and then said with a calm smile, "Maybe it would have been easier, but not more true." Michael nodded. He had learned to accept what he could not change, and above all, to value what he could still build. Raíz Viva, which had already gained national reach, began its expansion into new strategic regions. Tijuana, Mérida, and Veracruz received the first branches outside the traditional axis. Each office was adapted to the specific needs of its communities, respecting local cultures, but with the same principle that guided everything from the beginning: listening before proposing, building together, never from above. Sophia traveled constantly, but this time with a different purpose. Not to open paths, but to hand over the keys. In each city, she led intensive training workshops to select and train local leaders. Young people from different backgrounds with histories marked by exclusion took on the leadership of projects with autonomy and confidence. She listened to them, adjusted plans, shared lessons, but always made it clear: this is now yours. Meanwhile, Benjamin, who knew every detail of the operation since the beginning, naturally assumed part of Rais Viva's national management. With his careful listening and strategic firmness, he became the stable foundation that allowed Sophia to keep working in the field, where she always felt most alive. On the other side, Michael also found his own path. Inspired by the stories he began to hear in meetings with communities, he created the Heiress Foundation, exclusively aimed at supporting young entrepreneurs from urban peripheries. Without a heavy hierarchical structure, the foundation was born with a lighter, more flexible model, as if he himself were trying in his second chance to do what he never did in the first. And curiously, the two initiatives began to meet at events, calls for proposals and forums. Rais Viva and Raíces Futuras shared spaces and even collaborated on joint projects, with a silent respect growing between their leaderships. Sophia and Michael now acted as allies, but with clearly defined paths. She remained focused on listening and grassroots impact. He focused on resource mobilization and support networks. There was no overlap. There was complicity. And over time, what had once been tension turned into mutual admiration. Michael listened to his daughter's speeches at events and took notes. He recommended her work without embarrassment. And Sophia, when she saw him attentively listening to young entrepreneurs in group discussions, silently acknowledged that something in him had truly changed. Beyond public agendas, Sophia found time to dedicate herself to what most moved her: mentoring other women. Her sessions with young entrepreneurs became highly sought after. They were simple meetings, sometimes virtual, but filled with depth. She listened carefully, shared pathways, suggested alternatives. And above all, she said what many had never heard: "You are capable. Your place is wherever you want to build it." Her social media, once used almost exclusively to promote Rais Viva's actions, became a space of inspiration. With short texts, spontaneous videos, and real stories, Sophia transformed followers into a support network. She didn't speak as a guru or a celebrity. She spoke as someone who knew what it was like to have everything and still need to start from nothing. It was in this rhythm, between travels, mentoring, and silent encounters with herself, that the need to record everything was born, not as an achievement, but as a process, like an open scar that was becoming a guide. Sophia spent nights writing, not a manual, a personal, painful, and truthful account. At first she hesitated, afraid of exposing too much, but soon she understood that Renacer desde las sombras, rebirth from the shadows, as she decided to call it, wasn't just her story. It was that of many, and it needed to be told. The manuscript, scribbled by hand on the first pages and then typed into a computer, was reviewed by Benjamin with the care of someone who knew every silence behind each line. He read it in 3 consecutive nights, stopping only to breathe. When he finished, he didn't say anything. He simply left the notebook on the table and hugged Sophia tightly. His eyes said it all. People need to read this. It's not just a book, it's a mirror. Read. The launch was scheduled to take place at a cultural space in downtown Dallas, far from the luxury bookstores and close to the squares where Rais Viva's roots were planted every day. The line stretched around the corner. Young people wearing project t-shirts, community leaders, students, teachers, journalists. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who had crossed abandonment and turned it into momentum. Sophia took the stage calmly. She wore white. Her gaze was serene. In the audience, mixed among many, was Michael, standing discreet. But there, after talking about the book, about the writing process, and the desire for it to serve as a starting point for other silenced voices, Sophia took a deep breath and looked at the audience. To all those who abandoned me, who told me I couldn't, who closed doors and ignored my existence, thank you. You liberated me. Without your silence, I might never have heard my own voice. Michael stood up and applauded. He didn't try to hide. It was a gesture without pretense, but filled with recognition. The book became a bestseller in less than 2 weeks. It was adopted in universities as required reading in sociology, business, and gender studies courses. It received literary awards and invitations for international translations, but for Sophia, what mattered most was seeing teenagers sending messages saying, "Now I understand that my place in the world exists." Over time, the travels changed focus. Lectures gave way to smaller circles, reading sessions, workshops with young female writers, groups for training new leaders. On one of those peaceful nights in Boston, after a meeting with young people from the local periphery, Sophia and Benjamin sat on the small terrace of the office. The clear sky, the welcoming silence. "You know what I want now?" she said, without taking her eyes off the city lights. "I want to form other leaders. I don't want to be the only one, not the first. I want there to be hundreds, thousands, so no one has to go through it all alone." Benjamin smiled. "You've already started. They're out there. They're just looking at you to remember that it's possible." The next morning, Michael passed by the Raiz Viva office. He was carrying a copy of the book, already worn from being read so many times. He handed it to Sophia calmly. "You became the woman I never knew how to raise," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "But it was precisely because of that you became so free." She didn't respond with words. She simply pressed the book against her chest and nodded. Because now, more than ever, she understood. Her freedom had cost a lot, but it was non-negotiable. Months later in Puebla, an open-air auditorium was gradually filling up. Young people arrived in school buses, community vans, even carpooling. They wore t-shirts with their project names, held up improvised signs, and spoke to each other with excitement. It was the first joint event between Raiz Viva and Raíces Futuras, a celebration of impact, belonging, and above all, continuity. Sophia stood silently at the back of the stage, where she could see the details that mattered most. The shining eyes of those who, for the first time, felt like they were part of something. The shy smiles of teenagers now presenting their business ideas, their social startups, their prototypes born in neighborhoods where survival had once been the only topic of conversation. There were hundreds of stories that had crossed with hers at some point along the journey. Benjamin approached slowly. "We're ready for the next step," he said, almost as if asking for permission. She looked at him, not understanding. "International. We already have invitations from Bogota, Lima, Medellin, and a proposal for an exchange with Lisbon." Sophia paused for a few seconds, while the sound of the event in the background grew louder. "Yes, but with one condition." "What's that?" "Never forget where we came from and what we came to fix." He smiled, already knowing that would be her answer. While the team organized the panels, Michael moved among the young people, now acting as a mentor. There were no more formalities, no more ties. He sat beside them with a simple notebook, listened attentively, asked specific questions, and gave advice with the humility of someone who had learned that teaching isn't about showing superiority, but sharing the path. In the following months, Sophia began visiting public schools across the country. She walked into crowded classrooms with scratched desks and stained whiteboards and shared her story with the same truth she had always spoken with. She spoke of pain, strength, identity. She showed what could be built with ideas, support, and courage. For many of those students, she wasn't a celebrity. She was hope in flesh and bone. The media, which already knew her as an entrepreneur, now began to recognize her as something beyond that. A woman who had left behind a living legacy, one that spanned generations, territories, and narratives. The articles no longer talked just about awards, but about results. Not just lectures, but lives transformed. On the final afternoon of the event in Puebla, Sophia and Michael sat side by side at the edge of the empty stage after all the speeches. There was no audience left, only the team dismantling structures, taking down banners, and turning off the lights. They sat in silence, watching the last children running around on the grass. "You know," he said, in a low voice, "sometimes I think about how everything could have been different if I had seen you earlier." Sophia didn't answer right away. She looked at the sky in shades of orange and grey, and then said with a peaceful smile, "Maybe it would have been easier, but not more true." Michael nodded. He had learned to accept what he couldn't change, and above all, to value what he could still build. Sophia stayed silent for a few more seconds. Then she turned to him, her gaze steady and calm, and added, "I didn't lose everything, Dad. I found who I really was." He couldn't hide the emotion. He didn't try. Because, at that moment, he wasn't the businessman, nor the mentor, nor the public figure. He was just the father, sitting beside the woman who had transformed him without asking anything in return. As the night fell over Puebla and the last volunteers packed up the tents, Sophia walked to the center of the empty stage. She looked around one more time. She thought of Lily, of Benjamin, of Natalie, and all the girls who thought they were too small. She thought of the mansion where she had been invisible, of the black notebook hidden in the library, of the no's she had received with a wounded smile and kept as fuel. Now everything made sense. The path, the losses, the silences, the encounters, everything had led her here. She took a deep breath, left the stage, and walked toward the future, knowing that she was no longer a solitary promise. She was a movement. And where there is a disinherited girl, there will always be a space waiting for her.